To the cloud. And it is now, our meeting is called to order and we are now recorded. First, I will ask, is there any visitor business that is not on the agenda? No. Okay, good. New business. Our new business today is consideration of a request for variation of the required front yard setback requirement of 100 feet down to 6 feet, and the east side yard setback requirement from 50 feet down to 20 feet within the R1 zoning district for the construction of a 50 by 36 detached accessory structure, a garage, on property commonly known as 3378 RFD and submitted by Mrs. Marcia Dam. To begin with, I would ask Jim to give us the report that he submitted, and everyone should have received in their packet.
Yes. Thank you, Helen. The property does have an Old McHenry Road address, but it is set back somewhat to the east of Old McHenry Road. There's an access easement there that has been commonly referred to as TP Lane that actually comes out onto Old McHenry Road. The property is zoned R1 and the parcel consists of 4.1 acres. It appears to be a meets and bounds parcel, which means it was not actually formally subdivided as we would say, like Country Club Estates or something like that. Rather than going through the formal subdivision process, it appears it was carved out as a meets and bounds parcel. This is one of 6 properties that's under the control of the applicant. There's a total of 21.21 acres under the control of the applicant, including property that was formerly known as the Rosewood subdivision to the south. There were 3 lots there that were actually formally subdivided. They have never been built upon, and those have been acquired by the applicant. There is a single-family dwelling on the property. It was built around 1943. 3 accessory structures, 2 being a shed and a guest house. The property is non-conforming to the R1 setback regulations for both the front yard and the east side yard, but is conforming with lot size. There is a 40-foot ingress-egress and utility easement that runs across the northerly line or the front of this property. It does not appear that this is not used for access, and it's questionable whether there's utilities in there or not. As Chairman Wilson pointed out, they are asking for variations of the front yard setback from 100 feet down to 6 feet, and from the east side yard from 50 down to 20 for the construction of a detached accessory structure, which is a garage that would measure 50 by 36 or 1,800 square feet. There is no reclassification asked for. All the surrounding properties are zoned R1 residential, which is consistent with the subject property. Some properties are vacant. Others do have houses on them. In terms of lot coverage, they're presently at about 8.3%. If the variation is granted and the detached accessory structure constructed, that would take that up to about 9.3%, well within the 40% maximum lot coverage. Setbacks are an issue with the front and the east side. The west and south, or the west side yard and the south rear yard, are both well in excess of the 50-foot required minimum. A couple of things that have come up. First is the access and utility easement. Being a meets and bounds parcel, it does not appear that there was a signature block on here, which is typical with subdivisions that designate certain rights to the easement, typically to like utility companies, cable companies, sometimes the village. And this being the case, there's a question as to who actually does have rights to the easement. The applicant has made inquiries to local utilities. Those are included in your packet. I believe it was the NICOR, and one other came back saying that they had no utilities located in there. Electrical services provided by an overhead connection. You do have an exhibit in your packet which shows where the accessory structure would be located. And there are standards that I have in there for an accessory structure. One of the other issues that have come up in determining the subordinate nature of an accessory structure, we have typically used floor area. We've established a policy of 50% or less of the principal structure, or what we call the 50% rule, as a standard for determining the subordinate nature of such a structure. Property is unique in that it contains the principal structure, but also a guest house or a second residence, which is permissible, provided it's not more than 850 square feet and is on a property that exceeds 3 acres. The code also says principal use of the property or the principal structure. In this case, as the use is residential, the total floor area of both the residential uses comes out to about 3,165 square feet. That still exceeds the 50% rule, which is policy, not necessarily ordinance, by about 217 square feet. The applicant has noted a couple of things. First of all, the existing attached garage to the house has been converted to allow handicapped access for a family member. This has eliminated really any indoor sheltered storage for vehicles on the property. The petitioner wanted to locate the accessory structure close to the residential uses on the property. Also, they note the preservation of open space as a rationale for the variation request. If you look at the aerial photos that I included in your packet, you will see that most of the land is vacant and has been utilized for open space. Clustering of the improvements would help to preserve that open space, which is, again, something that's very key to the village. We have not seen any elevations for the accessory structure. Height is unknown, but it would not be allowed to exceed 15 feet. They would also need to get building permits and all of that. There are standards for variation that I've included in the report. You should look those over and make those part of your deliberations in determining whether the variation should be granted or not. That basically concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, so before we turn to the petitioners, let me ask the members of the Planning Commission if they have any questions of Jim before we hear from the petitioners.
I really don't. I did go over and look at the property midday today and saw what the owners had in mind. And I understand the situation over there, even though it's an extreme thing, they have a unique situation as well as a hardship.
I too went over to see the property today because it was hard for me to visualize what the situation was. And I was envisioning something much closer to Old McHenry Road. Part of what Jim had said is that this property is very much removed from Old McHenry Road. You cannot see Old McHenry Road at all from any point that I was on from you know, maybe the the roof of the house. I don't know, but I was all the way up to the house and along all of the driveway and could not even see Old McHenry Road from the property. Anybody else? Okay, so for the petitioners, the dams, first we'll swear you in so that your testimony is part of the record, and then ask you what you would like to present. So do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is true and accurate to the best of your ability? If so, say I do. Marcia and hello?
My name is Elliot.
Elliot, Marcia and Elliot. Could you say I do?
I
If-
do.
Okay, all right. So do you have anything to, that you would tell us in terms of, in supporting your request for this variance?
Well, I think Jim gave a very good summary of what we submitted and discussed. I would add to that we've talked to Nicor, AT&T, Comcast, and ComEd, as well as had the Julie flagging, and we've submitted letters from them indicating that there's no impedance on their access to any of their lines. I would also add that the property to the east that is in question is also controlled by us. Those are lowlands. They've been designated as conservation land, and so we are not interested or do not think that it is advisable to build on that property, but we control that property to the east. In addition, we have discussed the site and the plans with all of our neighbors and have submitted letters indicating the support of all our neighbors for the project as we have defined it. The only other addition I would say, in addition to what you said, Helen, is we're at least a quarter mile, if not a half mile in some places from Old McHenry Road, where the site, where our principal structures are, as well as where the garage site will be. And furthermore, the easement that is provided, and I think Jim touched on this, is something that is never used for access for this property. It's not been used since my family moved here in 1945. We have an easement from granted by my grandfather, also supported by my uncle, who now controls that property to our west, granting us an easement to use that driveway to access the property, which I think Jim referred to as the side lot or the south lot. We don't, it's not clear that is formally deeded, but I submitted a letter with support from Charlie Wachs, who controls that property, and indicating that he is working currently right now with his attorney to formalize that easement such that it would continue to be available should he sell that property, which he currently has on the market.
That's the big yellow house?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's correct. So, Helen, that was the driveway you came down today, was the one that we
Yes.
always used as our access. Other than that, I don't know what questions you have. We've tried to define a space that would meet our needs, as well as a structure that is appropriately sized for the number of vehicles we want to be able to park in there.
Okay. Nothing else that you want to add at this point? Let me then turn to any questions for either Mrs. Dam or her son Elliot that people may have, and I'll just go around as you're located on my screen. So Jeff, do you have any questions for the petitioners in this case?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Chuck, how about you?
Not really, just was asking. I did notice in the area where the garage will go, there's some trees, would they maybe located or anything like that, or are there any issues with the trees that are on that area of the land?
We've tried to be very careful not to lose any tree cover. It's very important to us. There's one tree that may need to be removed to support the structure. We think that is actually a diseased tree that is going to need to be removed anyway. We've had to remove a number of trees due to, what is the disease that they have, Mother? The trees that you've had to remove?
The ash.
Yeah, ash trees that have to be removed. That would be one of those as well. Otherwise, we won't have to lose any tree cover to complete the project.
Yeah, no, that's not really a sticking point with me that much, but I know that the village always likes to see as much preservation of existing trees as possible.
Yeah, that's very important to us as well.
Some of these have been declared by the person in charge of forestry as part of the original stand from 1840. Some of these old oak trees are the original stand. So it was very important to us to put a garage someplace where we would have to remove, and only one would have to go down. And we regret that, but that's limited. We have many, and we've been planting many. When my parents gave me the field, the meadow, I immediately declared it conservation. And then when I saw that the plots closer to McHenry Road were going to be developed, unfortunately, I didn't get there quite quickly enough. They did put the road in, but I immediately bought those 3 plots and also the plot that has the old white farmhouse by the road. And I've declared all of them conservation. I burn them every year. They are really a true meadow at this point. And the driveway itself is used by neighbors across the street who don't want to walk through the woods to walk, and which is fine.
Chuck, do you have any other questions?
No, not really.
Okay. Magdalena, how about you? Unmute yourself.
Sorry for that.
That's
I
okay.
don't have any questions. I did drive by the property. It's a beautiful property, well screened off. I don't have any issues, no questions.
Okay. And Richard, how about you?
Yeah, I don't have any questions either. I mean, I did the same thing. I did the drive-by. Although the accompanying supporting information was great, so no questions from me.
Okay. I have a couple questions. One, in terms of the size, because this is beyond what we normally do. Elliot or Mrs. Dam, can you tell me how much space is needed per car?
We're looking at
I don't know how that,
we calculate it based on standard sizes. It's designed to hold 6 vehicles.
so this space would hold 6 vehicles.
Mhm.
And do you need all of that space?
We do. We have our own vehicles, and we also have a couple of collector vehicles that we've inherited from my grandfather that have been a part of the property, have been used in Long Grove events for many decades, and they're vehicles that we like to preserve. And so it's important.
Okay. This next question, I guess, goes to Betsy, because I note that we don't have any sort of plan for what this building is going to look like. Is that a impediment to approving the variation?
Not necessarily. The variation just pertains to the yard setbacks. So they would be limited to being no closer than 6 feet on the north side and no closer than 20 feet on the east side for whatever they build. And no further zoning relief is being requested or considered at this point. So anything, the design of the building would have to otherwise be zoning compliant, and they would need a building permit, so they'll have to be building code compliant as well. So Jim was mentioning the height would have to comply with the zoning standards for an accessory structure. The floor area has to be subordinate to the principal structure. So they're not seeking any relief from those standards. And the overall design of the building would be reviewed under the building code and other applicable life safety and construction codes of the village.
Okay, and here's another question with respect that Betsy gets to you, because I note that while the utilities did, ComEd and Northern, the gas company, I think it was, both sent letters not objecting to the building, but both of them retained all rights to their easements. They are maintaining their easements. They're not letting the easement go. And if they ever want to use it, my understanding is that then the petitioners would be responsible for taking the building down to allow them, or to do whatever is necessary for them to use the easement. Does that present any impediment to our proceeding with this request for a variation?
Again, no, not necessarily. The ownership of the easement is something that I know the owners have looked into and that staff has looked into. We haven't identified any document that would indicate that there's a village ownership of that easement. I don't know that we've conclusively ruled it out, because we haven't at this point been able to identify what documents specifically created that easement. It's just referenced on a survey that was prepared in, I think, 1997. There's no document number referenced on that survey, and it probably, due to its age, is difficult to search for independently. So I know staff had inquired with the petitioner about whether they had a title report for the property that might shed some light on it. So we'll continue to investigate that before the village board would grant final approval. But if there is any village ownership interest in that easement, then that would be an issue for the village board as to whether they're willing to consent to the structure. If it's only third parties, then it's not, the village has no control over it. It doesn't affect our zoning, but the petitioners, your explanation of what the utility said in that letter is consistent with my reading of that letter as well. So I would say the petitioners are proceeding at their own risk if they build within an easement where it's not clear who owns the easement or what rights might remain. But that's not it's not really a zoning issue for the village to adjudicate any dispute that might arise in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, and Shelley, because you don't have your picture there, I missed asking you if you had any questions. So I turn to you last to see if you have any questions for the petitioner, and I apologize for missing you before I started.
I'm very short.
Yeah.
Only question I have is, there been any objections from anybody about this property variance?
Okay, Elliot and Marcia, have any of the residents around you expressed any objections?
No, quite the contrary, and we submitted letters from each of them supporting that.
Okay, the only one that I only saw one, which was from, I want to say the Clicks.
There were some others that came in the subsequent email from earlier today that Jim sent earlier.
We've got a letter from all 4 residents of the larger property.
Jim, do we have that, Jim? Because I haven't seen it.
Yes, we do, Helen.
Okay.
I sent those out to you earlier this morning. They came in yesterday sometime.
Okay, somehow I must have missed it, because I just have the one that came from the Clicks, and there was nothing else attached to that.
Well, Jim sent a new email earlier today that had some other letters.
Okay. So Shelley, did you get those?
No, I didn't, but were there any who read them, were there any objections?
The letters that I all saw, Shelley, were in support of the request, and I have received no objections from anyone else. I've actually had no communications other than the applicant on this request.
I believe.
Okay, that answers my question.
Those are the only neighbors in question, right? So there's only 3 neighbors and ourselves, and we have letters of support from the additional neighbors. Sorry, 4 neighbors plus ourselves, and I submitted letters from all 4 neighbors in support.
As Chairman Wilson said, usually variances are 50% or a little less usually are granted, but I think there's special circumstances in this one, so I think the variance should be granted.
Okay, let me ask, is there any other discussion or questions that anyone has for the applicants, for Jim, or for Betsy? If there is, unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay, hearing no questions, then I would ask of the commissioners, is there any motion which you would like to have entertained?
Ellen, before we entertain a motion, I just wanted to confirm that there's nobody else on the line from the public that, or on a caller from the public that would have any comments. I don't see anyone, but just wanted to confirm for posterity's sake that we gave
I
you-
have a listing of all of them and we see them all here. So I don't see any either, but thank you for the question. If you're there, speak up. They're not showing up on the list of participants, which as a co-host, I see the entire list of everyone here, so.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Is there, so we'll go back, based on the fact that the petitioner has presented this request for a variation. We have reviewed it. You have asked questions. Would anyone like to make a motion for our consideration?
Yeah, I would so move, but I just want to state on the record and hope that just so that it's preserved in the minutes, I expect this to be approved and I expect to so move, but I'd like it to be perceived for future petitioners that because this variance is so extreme and so beyond in terms of the setback, cutting into the setback, that this is a completely non-precedential situation with a property that's a historic property dated long before the village was incorporated, with a unique subdivision or group of properties, subdivision, I know these are Meeks and Browns properties, that is a unique situation that both by the condition of the property as well as the handicap of the resident is a unique situation. I totally support this, but I would like for future reference, just to make it clear, this is non-precedential and should not be for particularly people who live in a more traditional subdivision as any kind of precedent for going and asking for 90+% variation on a setback line. But beyond that, I'd be willing to move to recommend approval of a variation to the front yard setback for the required, from the required 100 feet down to 6 feet, and a variation of the east side yard setback for the required 50 feet down to 20 feet for the construction of a new detached garage accessory structure. I can't think of any conditions.
Okay, the motion has made. Is there a second to the motion?
I will second it.
Okay, so Chuck has made the motion. Jeff has seconded the motion. Before we vote, is there any discussion on the motion? I know I would like to thank Chuck for making that statement about this not being in any way setting a precedent. Because while this is diminishing what is called a front yard setback from 100 feet down to 6 feet, and the side yard setback from 50 down to 20, because this is such a non-conforming property, the fact that the way that the house is situated on the lot is what I think leads to asking for the setbacks. But the situation of the house on the lot is that actually it's the backyard that is facing Old McHenry Road. And it's so far back and in such a different sort of situation that this is totally a non-conforming type of property, which can never be considered as setting any precedent because of the very unique nature of both the siding and the way that the house is set up on this property. So Chuck, I thank you for pointing that out. Okay, any other comments about the motion? Okay, Brett, would you please do a roll call of the motion, please?
Sure. Do you just want me to go around and ask each commissioner their
Yes,
vote?
yes, please, and then end with me as the chair.
Sure. Jeff, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chuck, how do you vote?
Aye.
Shelley, how do you vote?
Aye.
Magdalena, how do you vote?
Aye.
Richard, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Helen, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes unanimously on an aye vote.
Okay, so congratulations to the dams. Your request for a variation has been approved by the Planning Commission. Jim, what is their next step? Just so they understand.
I will be making a report of the findings of the Planning Commission, and those will go to the village board, and I believe this will be presented as a report to the board next Tuesday. At that meeting, the applicants would like to see the village board direct counsel to prepare an ordinance approving the recommendation or basically ratifying the recommendation that you all just made tonight. The only other thing that I would say on the vote is you do have one absence, I believe.
Yes.
So it's a vote of 6 aye, 1 absent, just for the record.
Thank you.
It's still approved.
Did you get that, Brett?
I did. Thank you for
Okay.
pointing it out.
And so the meeting at which this will be presented of the trustees is the 7/14 meeting?
Yes, a week from tonight.
Okay, and according to that,
Go ahead, Ellen.
Commissioner Terrett is listed to attend that meeting via Zoom
Yes.
in case there are any questions.
And that meeting will be held remotely.
Okay,
Yep, I have it on my calendar.
it's on your calendar?
It's on my calendar.
Perfect. So Elliot and Mrs. Dam, do you have any other questions or comments for us?
Two quick questions. One, is there anything required of us at that 7/14 meeting that you just described?
It would be a good idea for you to be present in case there are any questions.
Okay.
They may ask you to present and summarize your need for the request. But Jim, what else do you think?
I think you're absolutely correct, Helen. They should be there and be prepared to mostly answer questions that the board might have. The board may invite you to participate, but I think asking or answering questions will be the primary focus.
So we should expect a Zoom invite via email to both of our addresses that were included on this meeting. Is that correct?
I will be happy to send you that agenda with that information.
Okay, thank you, Jim. The only other question is we paid a couple of different fees to the village, and I just want to make sure that we understand what that covers and then what would be subsequent fees that we might need to cover with respect to building permits and those other next steps that you described.
The fees that you submitted tonight were basically for the hearing. There's an $850 fee that's associated with the variation. $5 of that goes into an escrow that's used to pay contractual staff, typically in the review of the petition and the drafting of the ordinance and those sorts of things. The $350 is a filing fee. That is not refundable under any circumstances. If there's any remaining escrow that has not been used through the hearing process, that would be refunded to you. Building permit fees, you really need to talk to Margarita Romanello in the building department. When you submit plans and all that, that will be reviewed and your fees will be calculated based on what you submit. That's separate and apart from the fees you paid for the hearing tonight, however.
Okay, so fine. So, but following the trustee meeting and any formal ratification from that via or by village attorneys, then we would be free to move ahead with submitting our building plans and filing for that building permit. Effectively,
yes.
How soon can we do that following the trustee meeting? Only because
it's usually a two-step process. Next Tuesday, if all goes well, they will direct counsel to prepare the ordinance. That would come back at the second meeting in July for, I guess, what amounts to like a second reading, and that would be the formal approval of it. If council is directed to draft an approval ordinance, I think you're fairly safe in going ahead and submitting your building permit plans.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, our only concern is that given our need, we want to make sure that we are able to get this constructed before we have, find ourselves once again in the middle of the winter.
Yep.
Understandable. And I think even though the village office is closed, they remain available to answer any questions and issues that come across.
Correct. And email is the best way to do that.
Sounds great. And Jim, you've been very helpful thus far. So we don't anticipate any problems. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dams. If you choose to, you may still continue to participate in our meeting, but you do not have to. We thank you for your presentation and good luck as you proceed on your project.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you so much. If there's nothing else needed from us, we'll leave the meeting now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks, everyone else. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is approval of minutes of the May 5th, 2020 meeting. Very ably drafted by Brett Smith. Are there any comments or corrections, or can I entertain a motion? Anyone?
Thought they were fine.
Would you like to make a motion to approve them?
I would like to make a motion to approve.
Is the motion to approve the minutes of May 5th, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Magdalena has second. As we have been reminded, every motion has to be a roll call motion. So Brett, would you please take a roll call on that motion to approve the minutes of May 5th?
Sure. Jeff?
Aye.
Chuck?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
Magdalena?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
And Helen?
Aye.
Okay, consistent with the previous vote, there were 6 ayes and 1 absent. So the motion still passes.
Okay. Is there any other business that anyone would like to bring up? Not seeing any. Just a reminder that the 7/14 meeting is to be, trustees is to be attended by Commissioner Terrett. The 7/28 is by Commissioner Bauer. If she's not available, hopefully she will contact one of us. Okay, is there anything else? I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So
I
moved.
move to adjourn the meeting.
Oh,
Okay, so the motion was
Second.
made by Magdalena, and who seconded?
I'll second.
All right, so Chuck seconded. Do we have to vote on this one too?
Unfortunately, yeah, thank the General Assembly for that.
Okay, that's all right.
Then let's do it again.
Okay, Brett, would you please take a roll call on our motion to
Sure.
adjourn?
Jeff,
Aye.
Chuck,
Aye.
Richard,
Aye.
Magdalena,
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
and Helen.
Aye.
All right.
Well,
the
Go
motion-
ahead.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for making this a very efficient meeting. I really appreciate everyone's effort on that. Clearly, everyone was prepared, had reviewed the material, and some of us had visited the property, so we knew what we were talking about. Jim, do you have anything?
Yeah, on the horizon. I don't believe I will have anything for you in August, but you are likely going to be seeing a re-subdivision of the Canterbury Park Estates. That's located on Cuba Road. It was a subdivision that was approved, I believe, in 2005, 2006. They are going to be asking for reclassification as well as plan development. That does require referral from the village board, and I believe we'll have that queued up on July 28th. So your September meeting would be the earliest that you could consider that.
So as of right now, it looks to you as if we would not have a meeting in August?
Correct.
Okay, but you will let us know if something comes up.
I will also let you know if that meeting is canceled.
Okay, excellent. Well, everyone, you can hit leave the meeting, and I will stop the recording. And thank you all for your participation, and see you in a month or two.
Thank you, Helen.
Very much, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Jim.
Good night, all.